Hi, welcome to Town Meeting TV for Under the Dome, where we meet with local legislators. In this case, we are graced with the presence of 3 local senators, 2 from Chittenden County and 1 from Grand Isle, who will tell us about what is going on under the Golden Dome. If you just introduce yourselves and tell us the 2 committees. So in the Senate, you have 2 committees that you serve on. And yeah.
Okay, great. Yes. Hello, Megan. How are you? Hi, everybody. My name is Senator Martine LaRocque-Gulick, and I serve as Vice Chair of the Senate. There we go. I serve as Vice Chair of the Health and Welfare Committee, and in the afternoon, I serve on the Senate Finance Committee with my colleague who is next to me, Senator Chittenden.
Hi, I'm Tom Chittenden. I represent 11 communities in the southeast quadrants of Chittenden County, the south end of Burlington, about 25% of Burlington, South Burlington, Shelburne, Charlotte, Heinsberg, St. George, Williston, Bolton, Jericho, Richmond, and Underhill. I'm always worried I'm going to miss one of those, so I hope I listed all 11. I serve on 2 committees. My morning committee is Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs. It's a new committee for me. The last 4 years, I was on Senate Transportation, which Senator Brennan serves on, and he can probably talk a lot about the transportation bill and otherwise. My afternoon committee, I do serve on Senate Finance with my colleague Senator Gulick, and happy to talk about any subject matter on those committees or elsewhere.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thanks, Megan. My name is Pat Brennan. I represent Grand Isle County, which is Isle Lamont, North Hero, Grand Isle, South Hero, and all of Colchester. In the morning committee, I sit on transportation, committee I've been on in the House for 14 years. Very interested in that, in all aspects of transportation. In the afternoon, I am Vice Chair of Appropriations.
Great. So let's dive right in. This year has been a little
Megan, I apologize. I did not say what my district is.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
And slight correction, Senator Brennan, I do actually have a tiny slice of Colchester in my district. So you're most of Colchester, but a tiny slice, as well as most of Burlington except the far south end, Essex Junction, all of it, all of Winooski, and then a part of Essex Town.
That's right. I was thinking in the old days when we had 6 senators from Chittenden County, and we now have 3 different districts that cover Chittenden County, and you sit on 2 of those separate districts.
Right.
Thanks for that. So this year has been a little different in the legislature. Tell us about what your experience has been, and when I say that, what does that mean to you? This year has been different than other years.
I'll go. So I will say a new committee is a lot of new topics. Legislators, we are not experts, and at least I am not an expert on everything, but we have to vote on literally everything under the sun as it comes up and comes through committees. We go into depth in different subject areas of jurisdiction that are on those committees that we get assigned to. Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs is a very new area for me, so I've been learning a lot about workforce. We also are covering very important things like housing, so this CHIP proposal, it's been in the news of late. I'm hopeful that we get to a place where this really does foster and encourage more housing growth, higher density.
This is changing the TIF districts into like where you can do tax increment financing on a very local level.
Correct.
Okay.
I don't know if I'd even use the word changing. As it left the Senate, it was just adding another tool.
Great.
I think the House might have contemplated it more as a changing, but we need to talk to the House about that. But I do think it is another TIF tool where it's much more project-based, smaller scale, so smaller communities could be able to tackle it. I do see, I'm optimistic that we'll get something done, and I do see that as something that will address the core of a lot of our issues in Vermont, which is to foster more housing development where we want it and where our communities want it. We also on this committee talk a lot about pot. So this year I'm learning about pot, and I like to just joke about how we've been doing pot a lot the last few weeks. Sorry, it's a sophomoric joke, but it's been resonating well in committee.
For those who don't know, pot is also cannabis.
Yes, cannabis.
That's how it's most,
So we're looking at the bill that is now going to be coming to Senate Finance that just got out of our committee is actually going to allow for a pilot case of some festivals, so up to 5 over 1 year, where retailers and growers can showcase their goods in a similar construct to a farmer's market in a very controlled setting. But it's something other states have dabbled with, and we're really trying it out to see if it's something that we could normalize in Vermont. It's a new subject area, so I'm really learning a lot about pot.
Yeah.
That was an
Interesting.
attempt at humor that doesn't quite fly in this environment.
I was
but-
laughing on
I'm
the inside.
laughing, yeah, I'm
laughing. I really am.
This is interesting to me. There's so much legislation that comes through Montpelier on a year-to-year basis. This is where kind of the rubber hits the road and how we make the communities that we serve. Tell us a little bit, Senator Gulick, from your perspective and your committees, what's passed through that you want to highlight for folks, and what's left on the table that you want to work on in the upcoming year? And I say left on the table because we're not done with this session yet, but are we done we're done with most legislation that's going to be passing through this session, right?
No, that's a great question, Megan. Thank you for asking. So health and welfare, our focus this year really was on trying to lower costs in our healthcare system. As you know, we have one of the, if not the highest healthcare costs in the country, which we kind of sadly joke that then we are also the highest in the world, because as we know, the United States has extremely high medical costs and healthcare costs. So we have been trying to figure out a way to bring those costs down. There was an Oliver Wyman report that came out last year, I believe, last session anyway, that really laid out some very...
Who is Oliver Wyman?
This was a consulting firm that does these large consultations and reports around a variety of issues, but one of them being healthcare. So they came in, they did a big report, they looked at the state and gave us some very direct feedback and some processes and steps that we can take to improve our system and lower costs. A lot of that has to do with kind of decentralizing care, bringing care back into our communities, into primary care, investing in primary care, because we know that hospitals are expensive. They're important for acute needs and they do incredible work, but they shouldn't be doing everything. That's kind of one of the takeaways that we got from
What's
Oliver
an example
Wyman.
of the kind of care that's shifted to a hospital, that's shifted away from a primary care facility into the hospital?
One of the things I was going to say was just the amount of ER visits or ED visits that we have. Many folks who have mental health issues end up at a crisis level. They end up being taken care of in the emergency room, and that is incredibly expensive. And sometimes they're actually even just staying there because there are no beds elsewhere. So that's one example. Primary care, everything from, a primary care doctor can pretty much do everything, right? So you can sort of name anything that you might think of going to the hospital for. Many of those things could be done at a primary care doctor's office. But if you heard the recent report, or actually was sort of a story of a doctor up in, I think it was Isle Lamont. I might be getting this wrong, but somewhere up in the northeast of Vermont, a primary care doctor told his story of what it's like being a primary care physician in Vermont. He's the last one in his area, and he's going to be retiring. Lots of paperwork. He says he spends more time on paperwork now than patient care than ever before. And so these stories are coming out more and more. Our need for primary care, we have to pay them properly. And in the end, more primary care brings costs down. So long and short is that is one of the things we've been grappling with. And we've had a lot of bills that will help us bring those costs down. We've been trying to give a little bit more authority and license to the Green Mountain Care Board so that they can do their job. And you will be seeing these bills come out in the next couple weeks.
So some examples of that have been the reference-based pricing,
Yep.
right? So making sure pricing is
S-126
around.
was the bill that came out of the Senate,
Yeah,
that has
and then-
reference-based pricing in it.
And then what else
Certificate of
is
need.
that?
So 482 will give some authority to the Green Mountain Care Board, for example, to use an independent, what do we call, observer in the case of when there might be some discrepancies in hospital financing and so on and so forth. So these are really important regulatory processes that we need to make sure that we are keeping everything balanced. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And we'll come back to the question of what else, but tell us what's been going through your committees that you want to highlight for folks. What's
Well, I think one of the main things, I'll talk about transportation. I don't have to tell folks out there what kind of shape we're in infrastructure-wise. I mean, you have to drive the roads and you'll see what's going on. But the crisis we face in transportation is revenue. Over the years, we get our revenue from three major sources: DMV, purchase and use tax, and the gas tax. Well, gas tax revenues are declining rapidly, mainly due to the increase in EVs that are on the road. And
Do you have any, like, I've heard this before, do we have any sense of what that is?
like how many?
Yeah, how much?
You know, we talked about that number the other day. I know we're not anywhere near the target goal we've set for 2025 and 6. I want to say around,
New car purchases 12%.
yeah,
Does that sound right?
yeah.
We just saw the governor release the cap on EV sales requirements,
Yes,
right?
he
Because we
did
don't
that.
have the infrastructure,
Yeah, he executed an executive order to do so.
which allows car sales folks to not meet requirements, right, of EV
Essentially,
sales.
for now,
The
yes.
idea behind that is that there's not enough infrastructure.
Well, that
Or-
and the fact that dealers, large trucks and car dealers, but mainly large truck dealerships were facing the reality that they couldn't buy a gas or diesel powered larger truck without selling a certain amount of large EVs. They simply aren't readily available to sell.
Got it.
They aren't at this point desirable for some of the larger transport companies and so forth. So it was essentially going to eliminate or prohibit them from offering a larger selection of diesel-powered trucks. So that's one reason. I can't speak for the governor on his whole intentions, but I know that was part of it.
But you were I'm sorry to interrupt, you were on the revenue decline. So
Yeah,
we're losing money.
Losing money due to declining gas taxes, purchase and use is on the rise.
Interesting.
So I'll give you an example. This year we are paving 120 miles of state highway. Last year was 330. So that's a drastic, or
And that has
200,
to do
I'm
with
sorry,
the-
220.
So that
That's
has
a
to do with-
drastic drop.
And that has to do with the increase in prices, but also the decline in
A
revenue.
little bit of both.
Okay.
And, we need state money to match federal funds, and a lot of the matching funds are an 80-20 match. Interstate match is 90-10. We've never turned back federal funds, to my knowledge, going back in my 23 years. And before that, I don't believe we've ever turned back federal funds. And we didn't this year. But next year, we're going to be in a worse predicament than we are now.
When you say turn back, what does that mean?
Well, if your federal pot of money, let's use $100 million, for example, is available, we have to match that with $20 million of state funds. And
Got it.
if we can't do that, we can't accept it.
Yeah. And you've never had to do that.
We've
in
never
the
had to
past,
do
yeah.
that. I don't ever want to see us do that. In my opinion, you never look a gift horse in the mouth, and if the feds are willing to pony up $100 million, we have to be ready to accept it.
So let's talk about that a little bit. Declining revenues on the transportation side, increased cost of health. What are the solutions for where's the money going to come from?
Very good question. Go ahead, Senator Chittenden. I see your hand up.
So I don't think there are secret pots of money that we haven't tapped into. There are certainly ways that we can adapt our tax code to the changing times. Things that have percolated is one, I know this
Put
is
that in layperson's terms. Adapt the tax code to the changing times.
Senator Brennan just commented how we have declining gas tax revenues because of electric vehicles. So there is an opportunity to either recalibrate our gas tax revenues, so possibly raising gas taxes, or what is contemplated, I believe, in the transportation bill, start looking at mileage-based user fees, so that electric vehicles, when they register, Vermont registered cars would pay based on how many miles they put on the roads that year, to mirror in a way what the gas tax revenue shortfall, what we're estimating that they're not paying at the pump. There's other things that we could do. I think very relevant to this audience is the cable franchising fee that the declining revenues that we're taking from people when they pay for cable services to get access to fund public television like this. Community access television, that's been declining as people have cut the cords. So one thing that percolated last biennium that I think is worth revisiting is to look at how we could apply a similar excise fee on streaming services, which are really supplanting those revenue streams. That would be, I would argue, recalibrating our tax code to the now environment where people purchase or consume content on demand more so than stream through cable services, which has that federal fee. There's other things that definitely is part of a bigger conversation. That is the, I would say, 500-pound elephant in the room down in the legislature, having to do with taxing second homes, something that I personally have stated multiple times I would like to do because I want to align our tax code with our housing objectives. And if you tax something, you get less of it. And I would like less unoccupied residences or roofs in Vermont. I want them to be utilized. And if you have a second home, great. Great on you. I would like to use our tax policy to motivate you to want to rent that out, to use that roof in order to shelter Vermonters in one way or the other through leases, rental agreements, and so on. It concerns me when I hear that Maine and Vermont have the highest per capita number of second homes in the country when we also have a real housing problem, and that's due to a shortage of housing. So I think there are things we could do in our tax code. It's not easy. There's different ways to interpret this, but it is not easy to look at another state that has successfully taxed and identified second homes in a methodical way that the tax department in Vermont thinks we could emulate. So there's a lot of study that needs to go into that. So those are some revenue sources. I'd love to tax sugary sweetened beverages. They jokingly call me Tommy Tax, at least Russ Ingalls does. I don't know if I want that to stick, but I do think that taxing sugary sweetened beverages and maybe getting rid of the nickel deposit would be a way to raise between $15 and $30 million a year to pay for things like universal meals in our schools. All of those taxes, recalibrating our tax revenues comes with a lot of debate because every dollar has a constituency.
So, and since you brought up this pickle that we're in, what's your thought about how to generate this revenue or changing these the ways of paying for the things that we value in our community?
I have a thought. I have an idea. I'm going to float it next year along with other committee members. And that is to recapture the third of the purchase and use tax that goes to the ed fund now. And let me, before anyone goes crazy on me, because it's a very controversial idea.
Yeah.
We had what we call a JTOC transfer, which is a transportation's, let's call it, contribution or commitment to the public safety arena of $20 million a year. Was whittled down over the years from $46 million to $20 million. The governor in his proposal, and it will become law now, that we have that $20 million to work with annually. That is a flat $20 million. It doesn't grow. Costs grow, inflationary cost of doing business, cost of pavement, cost of building a bridge. But that is a stagnant $20 million in addition to our transportation fund. My idea would be to give the education fund that $20 million and recapture, and that's a word that gets me in trouble a little bit because it was originally designed for education. The sales and use tax was at 4%. Became 6%, and that extra 2% was 2 cents was designed to go to education. That is it increases with the cost of vehicles. New vehicle sales are on the increase, and that would get us to where we have to be reasonably in the transportation world. It was I think around $51 to $53 million this year. $20 million is a big help, but it still left us short. So that's an idea we'll float and most likely get skewered at the stake, but we're going to try.
Yeah. Well, what you're talking about is sort of different values, right? What do we value? Do we want to fund the roads? Do we want to fund the schools? And we
Well,
wanna-
it's a little bit of both, and I think the timing is right with the education, and again, I don't know where education reform is going to end up. I don't think any of us do at this point.
well, let's talk about it.
like to,
Yeah, let's
but,
talk about it.
I can segue us
Yeah,
fairly
great.
nicely. And the
Thanks.
way I'll segue is just to reiterate what Senator Chittenden said, which was about the second homes. Part of the education bill, which is H 454, has tax reform in it. And Senator Chittenden can probably talk a little more in detail about some of that. But second homes was one of the elements that was considered in the tax reform piece of that education bill. I am all for taxing second homes. I think it's a win-win for the state. Either folks pay the tax on their second home, or if they decide they don't want to and they sell the home, then Vermonters can potentially buy the home and live in it. And that's exactly what we need to be sort of encouraging. It is hard. I think the tax department has stated that it's difficult, but good things are often hard. So
What can you give us? What would that revenue look like on second homes? Do we have any sense
it
from?
depends on how much we would tax that. I mean,
Okay.
it's all unknown.
Yeah.
All we would know is that it
Has a
would
has a
generate.
study come out of the
That is what we're going to end
fiscal
up
office?
doing. That's what we're going
Okay.
to end up doing now is actually, we're going to have a study come back to us about a year from now, or hopefully a little bit less. And then we'll be able to look at it and contemplate how to enact it if we enact it. But yeah, so that segues us into education because there was quite a bit of tax reform contemplation in the bill. Some of it we've put in, some we haven't. But it was an interesting opportunity for us to start to think about doing things a little bit differently. And Senator Brennan's right. We have a lot to figure out in the next few days. The bill is going to be on the Senate floor tomorrow. And depending on how it goes, it might move on to a conference committee where an even smaller group of legislators will be discussing it and trying to move it forward.
What's the path of the bill so far? It came out of the House. It came out of the committee, went through the House, has landed in a Senate committee, and is now coming to the full Senate floor.
Right. So your earlier question was an interesting one. What was different about this session?
Yeah.
How did it feel unique? And I think one of the things that happened was that legislative leadership decided that that we needed education reform and that they were going to allow or encourage the governor to come early on in the session with a plan for education, which is what happened. The governor did sort of propose the beginning of a plan in January, and then we sort of waited and sort of held our breath as new versions and more detail came out over the session. And then ultimately, some folks in the House ended up drafting a bill and they presented it. It went through the process, it got changed quite a bit. Eventually it got voted on and then came over to the Senate Education Committee. And this wasn't until, late March, very late. So Senate Education had a couple weeks with it to do what they did. And then Senator Chittenden and I were sort of waiting in finance for the bill to show up, and it finally did, and we had it for about a week and a half, which wasn't a long time.
And what are you doing? What's your purpose in finance to look at the bill? Why did they send it to you?
So because of all the tax policy, finance really, we look at fees and we look at taxes. That's a big chunk of our work. It was our job to sort of give a good once-over to the bill, and especially focusing in on the financial implications and the tax part of the bill. But really, when a bill comes to you, it is your bill. So it was the Senate Finance's bill for a period of time to make changes to it. Is that a good intro?
It absolutely is.
Yeah. So where are we at with that? What are we, the big picture, as an outsider, the big picture was the governor said 5 districts. We're going to save money by consolidating. And
I'll
Where
just
are we at now?
I'll talk about the mapping part of it because
Yeah.
that's easy. There are no maps drawn this year.
Yep.
I guess when I say we, I say the education committee decided not to draw any maps. We're going to put that off and let a study committee of what, four,
We'll see, possibly.
yeah, possibly. It still has to go to conference, but 4 members of the House, 4 members of the Senate proposed. And then any,
This is over the summer. That's when the maps are going to be drawn to determine this question of districts
We have to vote on it.
potentially.
we have to okay it.
You have to
So
okay
it'll
it,
be,
okay.
yeah, it'll
Yep.
be discussed and come to us
Okay.
next January.
So
Go ahead.
I'll say a bunch. So the Senate
What else in
Education got, yes, absolutely. Senate Education got the bill first, and they really focused on this concept of a foundation formula, something that we used to have before Act 60, which really is, and I really want to frame this because it's helpful, how the money goes out to the schools. So what we really need to clarify is there's the education fund, which is really maintained by the state. And so the Senate Ed was really talking about new ways to calibrate and to equalize and to get fair amounts of money to go to each school based on the number of pupils and the characteristics of those pupils. They spent a lot of time on that. Senate Finance focuses on when money comes into the state. We're the tax committee. And so when you think about funding that money that goes out to the schools, where our focus has been, where our jurisdiction on Senate Finance is how does the money come in, which are the tax bills, the property tax bills that people watching this open up. How do we address that in an equitable way, building off of the good work that we've done over years in Vermont, and also looking at some more straightforward ways that are easier to explain, that also apply for a level of consistency, and what I heard from voters last fall, that will lower their property taxes.
Property tax is just one of the ways that education is financed,
Correct.
to be fair, right? Sales and use tax, other
When you look
general fund.
Federal funds.
Lottery,
Yep.
yeah.
So the total ed fund, if I estimate, I think about 65 to 70% are from property taxes. Of half of that is from non-homesteads, and the other half is about homesteads. Those are rough estimates.
Great, thank you.
Then about a third, so out of a $2.4 billion ed fund, about a third of that comes from those other sources, sales and use and so far. So what we're really talking about is that 1/3 of what homesteads pay, and that does, with a new model, affect how non-homesteads, which are your businesses, your commercial enterprises, your apartment complexes, multi-unit housing, how those tax rates would change as well. I want to just say, my first session in the legislature, there was this one topic that was really important. It was about local control. It was about beta. I don't know if anybody remembers this, but the city of South Burlington was having some parking rules, and it was really inhibiting beta from possibly being built at the airport. So it was a big tension. What I'm going to say is that was one specific issue that while I was trying to understand and study the different parts of it, there was times where I supported something, then I didn't support it, then I supported it, then I didn't support it. It's because I continually collected in a very fast-moving environment new pieces of information. This bill is 100 times more complicated than parking rules at the airport. And what I'll say is I continually collect more perspective on this bill. I did vote it out of committee. I voted out of committee because on the tax aspect, I think we made progress. We added an on-ramp so that it would be phased in over 5 years. We adjusted the tax exemption notion that's being contemplated to replace the property tax credit in a way that I think would have kept it revenue neutral, so it wouldn't have cost more to the ed system. So I did support the amendment coming out of finance. But as I've studied this committee, and I did do a couple of posts on my political Facebook page, which further elaborates where I am on this, if any of the listeners want to get a greater perspective, I do not currently support this bill, and I'm not planning to vote for it, but I am struggling with it. And so I am struggling with it because there are good aspects to it, but I fundamentally see why 30 years ago our predecessors adopted the system that we have today, because it honors local control. This system...
This is why the foundation system, so the foundation system was overturned and we have what we have today.
Correct.
And this is fundamentally sort of going back to that foundation system with some tweaks to recognize people waiting.
Massive tweaks.
Yeah.
What the biggest tweak is, I'll say our old foundation formula was incredibly small. It was like 7 to 10% of total spending for school districts. We're contemplating now 100% of what it takes to educate our kids, or maybe 90%, or maybe 85%. That is a big foundation. It would be the largest foundation formula in the country from the things that I've what I've seen in presentation so far. My concern with that is that will simultaneously raise taxes on communities that traditionally do not approve budgets and have relatively low tax rates because they've had local control over approving certain spending levels, because we will effectively force equity throughout the state where we will set a tax rate and we will set an amount of spending for all of our communities based on the pupils that they have. That will also, on the other end, as I've understood it, for the current high spending districts, it will cut their revenues. They will get less money and they will get property tax discounts. So we will level from Montpelier's perch how much districts get and what their tax rates are. So that will bring the low spenders to spend more in property taxes and get more money in their schools, and the high spenders will get lower property tax rates and they will get less money and have to do some painful cuts. That, to me, is my biggest concern that is making me lose sleep, is it will concentrate power over educating our kids into Montpelier, taking it away from our communities. Because in this world, people in Canaan won't be voting to approve that spending levels. They'll be given it from Montpelier. And I don't know if that's what we want as a Vermont, from a state of Vermont. I could support a foundation formula that is more comparable to what neighboring states do, which is maybe between 50 to 70 or 80% of the spending, and then you allow districts to spend certain amounts above that, allowing for variation between district. That gets into concerns about Brigham. So my current opinion is I don't support this bill because I worry about how much power it's going to bring into Montpelier, but I've talked too much, and Senator Gulick has a very sharp perspective on this topic.
I see you nodding. I see you nodding at some points and
Disagreeing on others.
Yeah.
So the House version of H 454, I love it because it starts with some findings and some intent language. And one of the things that they say in their intent, as the U.S. Supreme Court stated in Brown versus the Board of Education, education is perhaps the most important function of state and local governments. It's required in the performance of our most basic public responsibilities. It's the very foundation of good citizenship. And I think it's important to bring us back to that. And I, personally am not interested in underfunding our education system. I think the only way that we as a country are going to get out of the myriad crises that we're facing right now is through education, through ingenuity, through innovation, creativity, invention, all of those big words that really require, some, at the very least, basic educational principles, right? So that's kind of where I start. I agree with a lot of what Senator Chittenden said. It's been really hard to kind of grapple with wanting to provide all of the schools in our state with good schools, right, with equity. And also acknowledging that, for example, in Burlington, our taxes are pretty high right now, especially since we're paying off this high school that we had to build. But we make choices about that, right? We vote for our school budget. We've sort of made that conscious decision to invest in our schools and in our education. And a foundation formula, to Senator Chittenden's point, is going to be, instead of like, we're making these decisions, here's what you get. You get this amount. Will we be able to work with it? We won't have a choice. We're going to have to. On the other hand,
how would that affect Burlington specifically, for example?
I mean, it's hard to know because, to Senator Brennan's early point, we don't have districts, and the districts, depending on like the values, the grand list value and the wealth of the district and so on and so forth, will really affect how that foundation formula plays out. But if you think it through as a thought experiment, it seems as though the districts that have been spending more, have been voting their budgets, have been, investing, they will probably be spending less per student, and their property taxes will probably also go down. So on the one hand, it might be good for folks that their property taxes are going down, but on the other hand, that decision to invest in those schools will be taken away, and those numbers will probably go down. So there will be whatever cuts. I mean, I don't know how we're going to handle it, but there will be change.
Before we go too much further into Senator Brennan, do you have thoughts on this as you're hearing?
Well, I'm sitting with two folks who have expertly dissected this bill and have been involved in it, and I have not. But I do, I'm torn also, as Senator Chittenden said. I voted yes out of committee to move the bill. Appropriations had the bill for an afternoon to discuss mainly the funding to implement the program. And so I want to see it move. I'm not sure I can support the end result, but I have the islands and I have Colchester. And Colchester did well. We were underspending, or prudent about our spending, I should say. And we did well in the construct of this bill. The islands, on the other hand, did not fare well in the preliminary numbers that they would receive for what we call it, OEP?
EOP, Education
EOP,
Opportunity Payment.
The payment.
Education Opportunity Pyramid. Payment.
Payment
Got it.
per
Thank you.
student. It's 14,501, I believe, 14,501. So we did not fare well in that. In the South Hero District, we were down 22%. We would receive $1.1 million less funding out of a $5 million budget. So that could potentially close a school. And the same would hold true for the Grand Isle School, which that district received a 17.7 decrease in spending.
So it sounds like there's but we also don't know, if we don't have the districts drawn yet, how that'll all.
Well, it's that part, I guess, is concrete. No?
No,
Would you like to?
go ahead.
So one of my concerns is I really respected and appreciated the House's timeline with the complexity of this and it being a $2.4 billion fundamental system in Vermont that we all care about. Every corner of the state cares about how we educate our kids. I liked their timeline. I have stated this might weaken the Senate's position, but I'm not the Senate, I'm a senator. I am very concerned with the timeline that we are currently looking at with an implementation of FY28 for the foundation formula that is currently in the Senate position as it currently is, but it's really changing right now, it's evolving. I do not believe it is contingent upon the new school districts being formed. The House bill was, and I think that is good policy. Again, I'm weakening the Senate position for those insiders who know what that is, but I'll say it again, I agree and respect with the House's drafting and timeline on those two pieces.
Yeah, I can follow up on that. I agree. I certainly, at this point in time, will not be voting on the Senate version of the bill. And there are multiple reasons.
Not voting in favor.
I will not be voting in favor. There are multiple reasons. One being that we have here in the state of Vermont an expert on education finance, world-renowned. Her name is Dr. Tammy Colby. She is someone who put together a foundation formula for us in Senate finance, came to us, presented the various weights that are needed based on her calculations and her modeling. And the House stayed pretty true to her formula. The Senate took it and completely changed it. It seemed relatively arbitrary. I'm not exactly sure what theirs is based on. The governor started with a proposal that's called evidence-based, which is something that's used in only 2 states, Wyoming and Arkansas. Wyoming is currently being sued, and Arkansas is trying to find a new formula. So it's not a formula that's based in good process, and I don't think we should be using it. So though that is one issue that I have. The timeline is the other issue. We can't rush this. I mean, education is the biggest program that we have as a government. It is big, it's a lot of money. We need to take it seriously, we need to do it right. If you break something, it takes decades to fix. I'm not interested in breaking a system to then have to fix it later on. That'll be way more expensive than anything that we're contemplating right now. I want to do it right, I want to take the time to get it right. It is complicated. Brings me back to the Senate committee of 4 senators and 4 House of Representatives to do the districting. Legislators but mainly, for the most part, don't really understand education policy. It is complicated. It's Title 16, which is those are the statutes that govern education, very long, very complicated. And to boot, we have an even more complicated system in that we have this private school track and then we have this public school track. And the two of them don't really work that well together. And that causes a whole other level of complexity, which was dealt with a little bit in the House bill and then was dealt in a different way, less good, I would say, in the Senate proposal. So that just is like, you can see where this is complex. I don't think legislators should be the ones figuring out the districts. It should be educational experts, it should be mappers, it should be folks who understand transportation. That is yet another reason why I won't vote for the bill.
Mind if I go again real quick?
No, help yourself.
One other big concern I have with this, thank you, and I agree with everything, a lot of what you just said. I don't think I recall anything as a disagreeing, but the bigger concern I have is I think a lot of people watching this are wondering, will a foundation formula in this bill lower your property taxes? I am not of the opinion that it will. At the currently contemplated foundation formula that is effectively spending what we're currently spending, that does not translate to lower property taxes. The way to lower property taxes is to reduce spending in our school systems or to raise revenues elsewhere. We've already been doing that through these general fund offsets. We're running out of money, so we are spending a lot of money in our schools. So what it will do, though, is it will empower Montpelier future legislators, when the three of us might or might not still be here, who knows, but in 2 to 4 to 6 years from now, if this goes through, it will be Montpelier either underfunding or overfunding our school system. It will be Montpelier setting the property tax rate that we all pay in order to fund the spending levels that Montpelier determines is appropriate for all of our communities. That's not the epiphany, but the realization as I've dove deeper into this, that I just don't think Vermonters asked us to do that, because we have different priorities, different approaches to education throughout this state. What people value in Canaan is not necessarily what they value in Colchester, and we have a responsibility as a state to maintain certain degrees and quality standards, and we can do that without this heavy Montpelier stamp defining and taking away almost all local control and defining the spending levels and the tax rates, and that's where I'm increasingly a hard no on this bill.
So the governor sort of laid down the gauntlet saying, not letting you go home until you pass something, an ed bill that he agrees with. Yes, no, what happens next?
I mean, he did say that, and I believe it. I mean, I think taxpayers, voters, the governor included, are expecting us to come up with something. These are tough choices, and all three of us have laid out reasons why we can't support parts of it. Some parts are good. I'm holding out hope that when this bill goes to conference, we come up with something that is close to where I can support. I mean, right now, I've got folks in Colchester who think
So help me
who
understand.
can't support it.
Yeah, so help me understand this. So the bill's going to come out of the Senate. It's going to go to conference because you vote against it, or it's just going to go to conference because they know they can't get a vote to pass it? Help me just understand that process.
Well, who knows how it's going to come out of the Senate. I can't predict that. We got possible 3 no's right here. We'll see, but I don't know. You want to take a stab at that?
My understanding of the process is
Yeah.
it has to come out of the Senate to get to a committee of conference. So
Got
if
it.
there are not a majority of senators present that vote in favor of this, it will not leave the Senate, and then it will not get to a committee conference. If it goes out the way it currently is from the Senate, I am 99.9% sure the House is not going to concur, which means it would go to a committee of
Got it.
conference.
Okay, great, thank you. We don't have a lot of time left, and we're not going to solve this issue now, so I just want to know, what do you want constituents to know? What do they need to be communicating to you or to other folks if you're not their direct senator?
I would,
I guess about this.
yeah, I would just say that we need if we are going to go to a foundation formula, and believe me, some districts would really like that because it would give some transparency to the process. It would give some consistency because it's hard right now. Every year is different and they have to pivot. So if we do go to a foundation formula, I would ask folks to really make their voices heard, that it needs to be a foundation formula that's empirically derived, that makes sense, that has been studied and has been determined to adequately fund. That's what we're trying to get to, right? An adequate education for every student in the state of Vermont. Not a Taj Mahal or whatever you want to call it, but an adequate education so that they can hit their targets, right? And they can achieve the outcomes that we've determined as a state we want, the outcomes that we want. So that would be my number one ask, is that foundation formula is critical. And then all of the weights that we add on top of the foundation formula for students who need extra to get to those outcomes. All of those weights are determined by the foundation formula, right? They're derived from the foundation formula. So that's why it's important that that base amount be really, really accurate. So, and then we need to have the right weights. We need to have the right timeline, and we need to have the right folks at the table drawing up the districts. For me, those are the critical pieces
And
right
who
now.
would those folks be?
I mean, I think I said earlier, the House version had members of, all of the various educational organizations, right? The folks like superintendents who know what they're doing. The Vermont School Board Association, who helps
Yep.
school boards. Mappers, cartographers, how do you look at mountains and rivers, and how is that going to work? And then I think the House proposal had a couple legislators on it too. So Senator Hardy and I also presented an amendment in finance that didn't have any legislators on it. So really just leaving it to the experts to come up with maps. So those are the kinds of things that I would want people to be aware of and to advocate for.
Great. In the last just a little bit, you must be hearing from constituents about sort of what's happening in Washington and the impact of, are we going to lose federal funds, and what would that look like? What are you hearing? What do you want to share with us today?
Just in terms of education or generally?
Just generally, yeah.
I mean, I know from a health and welfare perspective, we're terrified of Medicaid cuts. We have, as many people know, a fairly poor rural state, and we rely heavily on Medicaid. So if those Medicaid cuts come through, it is going to be very difficult for our state.
What's the status? I mean, what are we here? What kind of cuts have we? What kind of cuts have you heard from folks that you have seen?
Well, they're still determining the budget at the federal level,
Yeah.
right? So it really depends on what that budget ends up looking like. But my understanding right now is that I think the majority, they're holding out for more cuts. So TBD, we just don't know.
You want to? Okay. I would say this. I talk to people that have been around for a long time that understand these systems, both the federal, state, and at the local level. They are more worried than I've ever seen them worried before in my time. With the cuts that are coming, I'm not trying to create panic. That I think everybody understands where we are as a country right now. I just anticipate next budgetary year to be the hardest this state has seen in a long time. So all these tough conversations are going to be, I think, 2 times or 3 times as more difficult next year, and we're going to have to be looking at cuts or possibly additional new revenues. But those come with a great deal more debate and hurdles to get through.
Yeah. I mean, besides the sort of like are we going to lose Medicaid? What's going to happen? There already have been instituted federal losses, like the Institute for Museum and Library Science. I know in the scheme of things, it's not a huge, it's $1 million on the state of Vermont side that we lost in federal funding. Other places, folks that rely on federal funding that get backfilled by the state, some cases. What kind of impacts have you heard currently that are being examined in terms of those grants? And I mean,
Sorry, go ahead,
Yeah.
please.
No, I was just, we hear every day in appropriations, we have folks in with funding requests, and nearly everyone that sits down, and including the committee, is everything is contingent upon the uncertainty in Washington. We appropriate funds for a certain area of government, and with the stipulation that the money is available and the programs aren't cut. So we're putting together a budget not fully knowing if we're going to have the funds to implement it in most cases. I know in transportation, we concretely heard from the administration in Washington that the funding for EVs, charging stations and so forth, there was I forgot the total amount, but that was cut.
Yep.
So that's on hold. And, you know, everything we do is contingent upon federal funding. So uncertainty being the key word.
Yeah, I absolutely. I would just add that we heard the other day about 10 million in cuts over the next couple of years for broadband. So that will be devastating for a lot of our communities. You know, and then if you tack onto that the fact that we are so reliant on tourism in this state, and that we have, our federal government has really alienated our neighbors to the north, Quebec residents and Canadian residents, because of tariffs. They're more reluctant than ever to come and visit, and we rely heavily on the dollars that we generate from people coming to our state and visiting us. So that is a scenario that is quite frightening. I don't want to panic folks either, but it is, you know, I also want people to be armed with knowledge.
Yeah. Did you have one other?
I was going to mention the broadband, but we've been through worse in this country. We'll get through this too.
Yeah, yeah. And speaking of, how are you all getting along in, and I was going to say Washington, Montpelier. What's the conversation like? We have, we sort of have across the spectrum here at this table. So how are you all getting along with one another in Montpelier?
We're all best buds
We
right
get
here.
along pretty well, actually.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no complaints here. I'm new to the game in the on the Senate side anyway, and these two senators sit right in front of me, and they haven't chastised me yet for anything.
Yeah.
So things are going well.
That's this week.
That's this week.
We try to
But,
represent our constituents as best
yeah.
we can.
Yeah. And and your constituents have varied political affiliations. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you all for joining us today. Thank you all for watching. If you want to see this and again, or you want to see other programs like this, you can watch at cctv.org, or you can also catch us on youtube.com/Town Meeting TV. Thanks for tuning in.